is a good one.
The honourable member for Gleig's Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the Irving story is an excellent example of success and certainly a reason for optimism. While I support their efforts, I'm concerned that the business environment in Nova Scotia is so poor that they could not access private capital. The Premier continually tells Nova Scotians that economic prosperity is only a day away, but it does not seem that private capital agrees. And if the Minister of Community Services wants to talk about Business 101, we can talk about job targets, and we can talk about all these things that we're not allowed to ask questions, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people in Nova Scotia and the tax dollars that the government uses. Is that where we're at in this House, Mr. Speaker? This government had 3 years to address our lack of economic competitiveness, and they continue to insist that we'll wait until tomorrow for things to get better. We're dead last as a province in this country in economic growth, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians can't wait. Our businesses can't wait. We cannot afford this government. So my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, why does the government continue to pursue policies that chase private capital away from this province?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my first comment, my first answer is that we were last. That's no longer the case. We were last, and now, Mr. Speaker, under this government, we've seen the economic fortunes of this province grow. And Mr. Speaker, for the first time, this province has a plan that's working, and we are going to stick to it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Gleig's Bay on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As long as businesses struggle to access capital, our economy will struggle. As long as businesses struggle to access capital, our government will continue to sign checks. Our province's economy is struggling, and this government keeps making things worse. The worst growth in the province, Minister. The very worst growth. Worst growth in the country. Yeah, congratulations on your record. Congratulations to you and the Minister. Yeah, you're doing a great job steering our economy. As long as pools of capital for businesses as large and successful as Irving are dried up, businesses of every size need to worry. So my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, why is this government dragging its heels and failing to address what is clearly a crisis of capital in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, the member has his history confused. Mr. Speaker, for 20 years, up until the time we came into government, this province was last in the country. Mr. Speaker, under our regime, this province has turned that ship around, Mr. Speaker. No pun intended.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. The Minister has a number of business advisory boards at his disposal, including the Industrial Expansion Fund Advisory Committee, the new Jobs Fund Board, the Economic Investment Committee, and even the Ship Start Here Steering Committee. I have a very simple question to the Minister. Which of these august bodies did he consult before committing to lending the Irvings $304 million?
That's right. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I will say that the IEF is no longer, so that board is gone. But Mr. Speaker, we consult with all of our advisory councils when we move forward on initiatives.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia has become the banker to the Irvings. Not just any banker, but a very forgiving banker. And so my question to the Minister is this. Given that he consulted with all these groups, will he commit to releasing all the details, all the discussions, all the paperwork around how the government decided to lend the Irvings $260 million in a forgivable loan?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd hate to think what it would be like in here if we had lost that contract. You know, some of those committees, Mr. Speaker, what they are is they give advice. They advise myself as minister on transactions that come forward. We value their opinion, their views. That's why they are there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will continue over the life of this government to make valuable use of those committees and those boards.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to think that we could live in a province where we win a contract like that on merit and don't need to lend $260 million to the Irvings and then write it off, because we're already a competitive, business-friendly province. That's what all Nova Scotians want. And so if the minister is so sure, why won't he just say yes? We will turn over all the documents so that every Nova Scotian who's being asked to give them $300 million can make the decision for themselves about whether he protected their interests or not.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, we've heard Mr. Irving say himself that if it hadn't been for this government, that they wouldn't have got that contract. Mr. Speaker, this is a time when all parties and all people of the province of Nova Scotia should be celebrating a win for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the IWK made changes to the way it manages assessments for children and youth on their wait lists. In order to accommodate these changes, the IWK laid off treatment staff and reduced the availability of inpatient beds in the ACT program, so wait times for initial assessments can be reduced up front. Mr. Speaker, I, like many Nova Scotian families who have benefited from the ACT program, understand the need for timely access to treatment. They also very much value the treatment they have received from the program. So will the Minister of Health and Wellness explain how taking from Peter on the treatment side to pay Paul on the assessment side is providing better mental health care for children and youth in the province?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would hope that the honourable member and I could at least agree that the system where only a few children got services, while the vast majority of children and youth got nothing in terms of mental health services, represented a system that was broken and that change was necessary. And Mr. Speaker, the people who are best able to determine what change is appropriate are the people who are the clinicians who work in the system, who developed a mental health strategy and plan to turn that around. And Mr. Speaker, this is what the IWK are doing. It will result in better care sooner for more children and adolescents, Mr. Speaker, and I fully support that approach.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister knows she is defending the indefensible. When you just wipe off 300 names, call 600 others, and give them treatment or offer assessment and treatment sometime in the future, where is it really going? She knows full well that 2 years of DHA budget cuts, including cuts to the IWK mental health budget, is forcing them to focus on freeing up money for assessments by cutting back on treatment. Mr. Speaker, this minister would have been the first person on her feet fighting the injustice of short-sighted decisions, yet today she defends the decision. This minister knows full well that this health cut decisions made by the NDP government is what forced the IWK to make this decision in the first place. So, Mr. Speaker, given the minister has had a few days to think about what is happening at the IWK, will she now admit that timely access, proper treatment produces better outcomes for patients?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's very sad that some people don't want things to improve. They don't want to see changes. They're quite content with the status quo, where only a few people get access to services and the vast majority get nothing whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we are making changes in the mental health system. These changes will result in more programs being offered at the community level, and this is the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker, and I fully stand behind these changes. These, in fact, are the changes that I have fought for more than 25 years as a social worker who's worked in mental health, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't look like the minister was in too much of a hurry 3 years later and finally making a move. Mr. Speaker, if you speed up assessments and don't have appropriate residential or community-based mental health programs to ensure timely access to treatment, you simply move children and youth from one wait list to another. And the mental health providers are telling us that right now across this province. The NDP healthcare cuts are forcing the DHAs like the IWK to fund improvements in access by cutting programs that provide treatment, and that is wrong. Will the minister admit that when you pay for faster assessments by cutting treatment programs, you are impacting patient care?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, these changes will result in better care sooner for a much larger group of children. Additionally, kids that need urgent care will continue to get urgent care. Nothing has changed in this regard. The 22 workers, youth care workers that provide custodial care essentially at nights and on weekends will still see a complement of 120 youth care workers in that facility providing care, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, this is a model that will see faster, better results for more families. It is the right thing to do, and I still stand fully behind this model, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, for 53 years, Talbot House provided residential addiction treatment for men in Cape Breton. Talbot House recently, abruptly closed its doors and left the people of Cape Breton with a whole lot of questions. Will the Minister of Community Services lift the shroud of secrecy and tell the men and their families who rely on these services why the minister closed the doors and removed this vital service from this community?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the recovery houses that we have throughout the province are vitally important, and we have supported those. And in fact, we were not responsible for closing it. So I would think the honourable member should get her information straight. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of this minister to ensure that her department can properly manage its programs and guarantee a continuity of service. People in Cape Breton are wondering what other local, accessible, comparable programs have been made available to men needing these services.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that every person that was in that recovery house was well taken care of. They have a placement that they're satisfied with. And the fact is that that is another organization that is run by a board of directors. The board of directors made the decision, not community services.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the people of Eastern Passage learned that this government was making good on an election promise from the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. The Premier announced $15 million for a high school in Eastern Passage where the residents do very much want one, which we understand. But this wasn't on the Halifax Regional School Board's election priority list, so it must be on the NDP's re-election priority list. My question to the Minister of Education: will she please explain today why she chose to circumvent the Halifax Regional School Board's needs-based process in favour of a politically motivated process?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very proud to stand here and to answer that. As part of Kids and Learning First, a part of our plan, we were very clear that we were going to increase our trades education, our skilled trades education in Nova Scotia, and we have started that work. We wanted to make sure that we got going as soon as we could to meet the needs of the industry and to meet the needs of our students, to give them the opportunities that they need. So we making sure that we're following our plan. Kids and Learning First. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in April 2009, the Premier said in a news story, "We want to make sure that those are the priorities that the school boards have asked for." Well, Mr. Speaker, times have changed. The government asked school boards to update their capital priority list by April 12th. Yesterday, the sneaky NDP came out with a funding announcement that they knew would not make the Halifax Regional School Board's list, and they are barging ahead with the high school that politics built. We think that's sneaky. My question is, which priority projects on what school board's priority list will be delayed or cancelled because of the new Eastern Passage High School? Will it be the Sheet Harbour, Hants County, and who will pay for it?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're looking forward to April the 20th when I receive the priorities of the school boards. Decisions will be made at that time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Halifax Regional School Board, like all school boards in the province, has recently gone through the difficult process of making NDP government-ordered cuts. The Halifax Regional School Board was forced to make $3.2 million in cuts, and they were told to reduce building upkeep costs. And now the school board is being saddled with ongoing maintenance costs for a new high school they never asked for, maybe preventing building a school in Sheet Harbour that could consolidate 4 expensive old buildings into one. Question: since the government did an end run around the Halifax Regional School Board when it comes to capital funding for the new Eastern Passage School Board, is the minister also footing the bill for ongoing costs associated with the school?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say that it was a wonderful day to stand with the chair and the superintendent of the Halifax Regional School Board and a number of their committee, their board members, to celebrate the fact that this government is making sure we're meeting the needs of our students. We said in our Kids and Learning First education plan that we were going to increase skilled trades education in the province. This is an opportunity to have more of our young people engaged in learning about skilled trades, and so therefore I'm very proud to stand here to say that our government does what it says it's going to do.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, youth in Nova Scotia are getting a raw deal from this NDP government. Cuts to education have a profound impact on children and youth and their futures in this province. Public education funding has been gutted by this government to the tune of $65 million over the past 2 years. Mr. Speaker, prosperity starts in the classroom, and this government is turning a blind eye to the impact that education cuts will have on the children and youth in this province and their future. When will the minister responsible for youth actually start advocating for youth and fight to reverse these massive and damaging education cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing more important than our children, and this government is supporting the needs of our children. We are making more investments in our children than any other government. We are increasing our per student funding into this budget. Would like to remind, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the member opposite that under the past government, there was a 43% increase of costs. Costs were going up. At the same time, our increase, and maybe they should cheer, but unfortunately, the results of our evaluations showing that our students were not gaining any in their education. Actually, we were losing ground. While those costs were going up, unfortunately, our population was going down. This government is supporting the needs of our students. We're investing in our students, making sure that they have the programs and the supports that they need. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this government has the nerve to cut $65 million out of our classrooms and say that they're investing in the youth and the future of this province. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, that defies what educators are saying, that defies what parents are saying, that defies what students are saying, and it defies logic, Mr. Speaker. And the same thing is happening with our healthcare system. This government healthcare budget cuts are up to 3% this year. Youth mental health workers are being cut at the IWK. Nova Scotians haven't seen any improvement in wait times, and young people are being affected, Mr. Speaker. When the Minister of Health announced the DHA budget cuts, the minister responsible for youth remained silent. Will the minister responsible for youth tell the members of this House when she'll actually stand up for youth and fight to reverse these massive and damaging cuts to our medical system?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but I would ask the Minister of Health to respond to a health question. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there have been no cuts to youth and children's mental health services in Nova Scotia, at the IWK, or anywhere else, Mr. Speaker. And let me repeat what I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that when we gave the DHA their targets for a 3% reduction, they were told to protect mental health services in all of their districts. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, that is what has been done.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the fact that the minister responsible for youth couldn't answer a question about youth speaks to the value that this government holds our youth in our province, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Community Services has decided not to support the 24/7 model for supportive housing in rural Nova Scotia. Without access to supportive housing, homeless youth are left with very limited options, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister responsible for youth finally stand up for youth and fight to reverse the Minister of Community Services decision?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will take the opportunity a little bit later to speak to the member opposite to explain about the Youth Secretariat and what that work does. But at this particular time, I would like to ask the Minister of Community Services to answer the question on that particular point. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member certainly knows that this minister and this government cares about youth, and that's why we created a new model. But they don't understand anything new. They want to do everything the old way that doesn't work, Band-Aids approach. And with youth, we're serving, these youth will have the opportunity to receive hub model support services throughout the province. Whether they decide to leave from Yarmouth, they will have that support wherever they go. But the Liberal, all they want is in one area, a Band-Aid approach, and they know that. They better get with the times.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to you will be to the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. In a March 16 CBC.ca article, the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture said, and I quote, "We have no intention of looking seriously at a moratorium at this time or any time in the future. I'm encouraged to bring forward some factual information forward to those who have some possible concerns about agriculture," and I'll table that piece of information. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is this: where did the Minister find the factual information that he wants to share with those of us who have concerns about aquaculture?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Well, thank you very much, and to the member opposite, I really appreciate this question. I think the timing couldn't be better, but just to review, I have a very well-seasoned staff in the Department of Fisheries and Agriculture that I rely on a daily basis, and we confide in our science base from our fisheries in Ottawa or in all the different departments there. So I'm very confident that any information that we talk about agriculture is up to date, and this is something that I think that can be done in a sustainable manner, and we're there to protect the environment. Thank you very much for the question.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, early in March, the Minister had this to say about the outbreak of a deadly ISA and the destroying of 3 pens of salmon. Quote, "There's no effect on the traditional fishing industry. I can reassure you, based on scientific information, that there's no effect on the lobster industry. Human health is not in question," and I'll table that as well, Mr. Speaker. My question, can the Minister please produce the scientific information he referred to that shows that ISA has no effect on the traditional fishing industry by the end of the day?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I'll ask my staff to rely on that, but the information that I rely on is on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which is the lead agency on this, and I can tell you that we have followed protocol to the T on this issue, and I have the greatest confidence that the health of Canadians and Nova Scotians is not at risk, and more importantly, or just as importantly, the traditional fisheries, especially the lobster fisheries in that area, is not at risk. And that is with great confidence I stand here, and I thank you for the question.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad he's thankful for the question. I would have been really thankful for an answer. You know, when it comes to agriculture in this province, this NDP government is going to blow it if they don't get their act together, Mr. Speaker. Stakeholders have told us that in 2010, a FOIPOP relating to risks to lobster habitat, the Minister's staff admitted that they did not have any scientific data, not one single piece of paper. They said that such data is held by the Federal Department of Fisheries. They said that it was held by Environment Canada, and that the provincial staff have never had an opportunity to view that data. Well, Mr. Speaker, this minister has just said he's based everything on scientific fact. Will the minister admit today that this decision around agriculture and its risks to traditional fisheries are not based on science?
Order, please. The time allotted for all questions put by members has elapsed. I will the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, the Leader of the Opposition suggested that there was a growing number of FTEs in the Department of Education. I just wanted to table for the House's information the actual numbers with respect to the Department of Education. Shows 7 less FTEs this year and in past years. I'm sure it was just an honest mistake.
Order. I'm just going to let the Honourable Member know that it's not a point of order. Okay, thank you. It's a difference between 2 members. The Honourable Leader of the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, just to help out the Premier on a point of order, is I believe it was an increased cost in administration in the Department of Education of 30% that the Premier may want to reflect upon, and maybe I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss further in the days and weeks ahead.
Order. And that also was not a point of order today. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader to call business for this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call bills for second reading?
Bills for second reading.
Could you please call Bill 1, the status of the Artists Act?
Bill number 1, the status of the Artists Act. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now move that Bill number 1, the Status of the Artists Act, be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, the Status of the Artists Act is a way to properly acknowledge the role of the artists in our society and recognize their contribution to the cultural, educational, social, and economic fabric of the province. Developing Nova Scotia's arts and culture sector is a priority for the government, Mr. Speaker. We have listened to their voices and are acting on priorities they've identified to help celebrate, nurture, and grow a healthy and vibrant artistic sector in Nova Scotia. Since introducing the 5-point plan for arts and culture in February of 2011, we have moved forward with its elements, of which this legislation is one. In our continued effort to make life better for families in every region of the province, I am so pleased that we are working with members of the sector to achieve success in our commitment to support Nova Scotia artists on their path to creative excellence. A committee of well-respected members of the arts sector helped draft this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to mention those committee members by name. They are Jim Morrow, Artistic Director of Mermaid Theatre, Peter Dykes, Visual Artist and Curator, Anthony Black, Artistic Director for Tubi Theatre, and Barbara Richmond, Executive Director of Strategic Arts Management. This team combed through countless documents on best practices and reviewed similar legislation from across the country, indeed from around the world, and along with department staff, developed this legislation that is before you today. For the artists, the Status of the Artists Act defines the term professional artist in Nova Scotia. It recognizes the role and contribution of the artist while declaring his or her various rights. For government, this legislation outlines the vital role the province plays in fostering and nurturing a healthy and vibrant artistic sector. It makes sure we have the necessary tools to support Nova Scotia's artists and their unique needs. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is setting the foundation for a fair and equitable treatment of artists. It strikes a balance between defining what a professional artist is and enabling government and the arts sector to take measures to support their development. It is an umbrella, if you will, that will allow all organizations that support artistic development, including government, to take steps that will provide for a good quality of life for artists in our province. It will also provide the tools to increase the potential for our creative economy, to benefit communities through jobs and economic activity. Mr. Speaker, we take seriously our mandate to promote this province's vibrant art and culture sector. Ensuring the health and vitality of Nova Scotia's creative economy is important as we advance our Jobs Here plan to create good jobs and grow our economy. I am proud to say that we are well on our way to realizing all of the points in the 5-point plan set out last February to ensure that our arts and culture sector helps shape a positive future for Nova Scotia. Both Arts Nova Scotia and the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council have been established. Just last week, we appointed the first board of Arts Nova Scotia. The interdepartmental committee to coordinate support and funding for the development of the sector has been meeting, and the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council has been researching approaches to developing the creative economy and is getting underway with the work to develop a first-of-its-kind cultural strategy for Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, a lot is going on, and it's all based on ensuring the voices of the arts and culture sector are helping government determine priorities for developing Nova Scotia's creative economy. I look forward to the Status of the Artist legislation being realized and giving Nova Scotian artists a voice in our growing economy, Mr. Speaker. We are so pleased to have so many artists and a sector that is growing here in Nova Scotia, and I want to personally thank all those individuals from around the province, from one end to the other, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, for their involvement and their commitment on our path to ensure that we meet the needs of our artistic communities throughout Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here today and speak on Bill 1 because I believe it's a good bill. And I'd like to speak about the artist because I am somewhat of an artist, I guess.
Tell us more.
Not a great speaking artist, but I'm an artist somewhat. I'm a boat builder. I can build model boats, and I've done that all my life. I guess I got that from my grandfather. He was a boat builder, and he built a boat every year. He built it in the winter, and he'd go fish it in the summertime, sell it in the fall, and build another one. He'd done that all his life, so I'm doing that, but it's just models. And if I must say so myself, I do a pretty good job. So anyway, I like it. I enjoy that. And I enjoy to see this bill come along to recognize the artist for Nova Scotia. And that's what this bill does. I believe it just recognizes the artist finally. And last year we tabled a bill in this House, the Liberal Party did, that would give artists an incentive to come to this province and be in this province, and that was through tax credits to the artists. And I'm hoping that the minister will look at this bill that we submitted last year and somehow maybe adopt it into this bill. I mean, when it comes to bringing artists to this province, just recognition may not grow the population of artists, but certainly the almighty dollar will, because everything seems to happen around the almighty dollar anywhere in this country, especially this province. It's all about dollars. We've been hearing about that all day. I hear about it every day. So an incentive, a tax incentive for artists, I believe would be a great thing. Maybe if the minister could look at adopting that into this bill. Because like I said, this bill just recognizes, and that's great. I'm glad the artists are recognized, and if you like, I could show you a few pictures of my boat and boats that I've no, not making any promises, but yeah, I could table a boat. Maybe I could table a boat, Madam Speaker. So, but anyway, with that, I'm looking forward to this bill moving on, and like I say, I hope the minister will look at tax incentives for the artists down the road, and it may even be a greater help to bring artists to this province. So with that, I thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'll take my seat.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wanted to look quickly at this bill and exactly what it does. And I would thank the minister for bringing this bill forward, of course, to support the arts and cultural sector, of course, recognizing the role of the artist. You know, if we look at exactly the statements that are held herein, there's a lot of motherhood and apple pie statements in here, and of course, government's support for the sector. It really doesn't get down to a whole lot of detail on exactly what is it going to do and what it really means to the government of Nova Scotia itself and what the actual responsibility in supporting the artists is going to be. Is there taxation cuts or tax cuts you could be able to glean out of this? Maybe, maybe not. Are there grants or other programmings that could come out of this? Maybe, maybe not. So I think what this ends up doing is maybe sets a bit of a foundation for future work, and we'll be happy to see other work that might come along from this one, Madam Speaker. So I'm hoping the minister has further detail, further information of how this is truly going to help Nova Scotia's cultural identity and, of course, the artists that are so important to many of us in this province. So with that, again, Madam Speaker, I thank the minister for bringing this forward. But again, the message here is let's get some more detail on it. Let's see what it's actually going to do for artists in Nova Scotia. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Argyle. Forgive me for Lunenburg.
That was confusing. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to stand in my place today and speak to the legislation, the Status of the Artist Act. This is the first piece of legislation being introduced in the spring session of the legislature, and as Ministerial Assistant to Community, Culture and Heritage, and as a lifelong member of the arts community, I'd like to say how significant this is. The arts and culture sector in Nova Scotia have grown significantly over the years because of the tenacity and sheer talent of our people. The caliber of the work in all areas of the cultural field in our province is nationally known and internationally known, and this legislation will allow artists to move forward in new ways. Nova Scotia now joins the jurisdictions of Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Ontario in having this kind of legislation. And at some point in the future, Madam Speaker, I hope that all the provinces in Canada will support their creative communities in this way. Madam Speaker, the purpose of the Status of the Artist Act is to acknowledge the artist's role in building the province's identity and culture and enhance the art that brings the province's social and economic well-being. It identifies the terms of a professional artist in our province and also acknowledges the unique conditions that artists work in our province. There's one part of this legislation that I find particularly relevant, and that is that every year the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council and Arts Nova Scotia must make a report and present that to the minister. This will keep this legislation relevant and forward-moving, and I think it's something that's very, very important. It took some time to get this legislation moving, and it's here right now. Timing is always something that's important, and things evolve in the way that they're meant to evolve. My mother, who was a pianist and talented fine needleworker, always said, "Slow and steady wins the race." And although we haven't won the cultural race at this point, we have certainly come a long way. The Status of the Artist legislation is considered fundamental to the professional arts sector, and now that it exists, the creative economy will grow. It always seems to happen in a legislation like this comes forward in areas where the creative economy is very prosperous and very talented, as it is in Nova Scotia. After graduating from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in the mid-70s, I was one of the founding members of Nova Scotia Designer Craftsmen. That was back in a time when calling all the men and women craftsmen was still politically correct. That has changed, the name has changed, and it all takes time. There are thousands of artists now in the province following creative pursuits. My business partner, Tim Worthington, and I established Birdsall Worthington Pottery in the 1970s in Mahone Bay. And at that time, there wasn't much interest from the government of the day to help develop this sector. That has certainly changed at this time. Organizations evolve, helpful programs to promote the arts sector evolve. And we are now seeing a government committed to this vital community. It has evolved and formalized the introduction of the Status of the Artist Act. Our Premier announced in February 2011 the province's 5-point plan for arts and culture. And to bring in this type of legislation was one of those commitments. Our minister has spoken about the people who are on the committee who worked on this, along with senior staff from the department, and these people really must be thanked over and over again. The work they did to do a national and international jurisdiction review of similar legislation, just to see what kind of key points we wanted to develop and put in our legislation. They worked very hard. Jim Morrow, Barbara Richmond, Peter Dykus, and Anthony Black are certainly to be commended. They've done such a wonderful job for us. The response from the arts community since the bill's introduction on Friday has been very enthusiastic. My Facebook postings and comments have moved like the wind. It's very important that this part of the 5-point plan that came into effect last week was the appointment of the first Arts Nova Scotia board. As the transition chair of the committee that worked to define the terms of reference for the Arts Nova Scotia last summer and fall, I'm very pleased to see this committee up and running. Andrew Terrace, the former director of the old Nova Scotia Arts Council, noted that the day the new board met on March 27th was the very same date 10 years ago when the previous government shut down the Arts Council. Shame. When we were in opposition, we were committed to recreating a standalone Arts Council, and that is just what we've done. Quote, another promise fulfilled, as a friend on Facebook said. The status of the artist legislation I am so proud of today will give artists from every region in our province a clear signal that this government, quote, takes seriously our mandate to promote our province's vibrant arts sector, end quote from the Minister of Community, Culture and Heritage. There's one more quote that I would like to relay, and that is one that I think is very heartfelt from the artists that I've been speaking to over the last few days. And it's to quote Ron Bourgeois, the chair of the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council, when he said, this legislation, quote, defines where I fit in the fabric of Nova Scotia. Yesterday, there was nothing. And today, I feel I am recognized and respected as an artist within this government. So as my good friend, the MLA from Colchester, Musqueam, but Harbour would say, I second that statement. The second way of seconding that is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well done. Now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know this is a bill that helps our important arts community. Nova Scotia has a wealth of artistic talent in a number of different fields. It's a rich mix of cultures, beliefs, and experiences. The arts play a significant role in our provincial economy, whether this is through independent artists or big-budget films in our movie industry. And there's also always been a wealth of musical talent, from the early beginnings of Celtic, Acadian, and other roots music to the constantly evolving music of today. Nova Scotia continues to celebrate its artists at home and abroad. In fact, Madam Speaker, music is probably one of the most culturally significant aspects of Nova Scotia's history and heritage. In every corner of our province, music plays an intricate role in the arts community. Participation in arts and culture has a significant positive social and health benefits for individuals and communities. And I have to say, I grew up playing in bands. I wasn't in a cool band, I was in marching bands and concert bands, but I grew up playing in bands, and that may be the account for my hearing loss today. But it was a huge part. It wasn't the tuba, no, it wasn't, it was French horn. It does. But we were loud, it was a huge, important part of my growing up, and that's why, for example, I think a program like Artists in the Schools, which is delivered in partnership with the Department of Education, is so important. The program helps develop the creative capacity of students in a different part of the arts, and we're pleased to see the government finally moving forward with this legislation. It's something the Liberal caucus supports, and we've called on the previous Conservative government to enact, and this NDP government to move forward with for some time, because the arts are so important to Nova Scotians. Actors, painters, musicians, sculptors, hundreds of other artists make up what Nova Scotia is all about, and having a healthy arts community works to generate jobs and attracts others to Nova Scotia, boosting our tourism industry. In places like Yarmouth and Western Nova Scotia, this is particularly important since the NDP government cut the ferry so abruptly in 2009. And that decision by the NDP government, without any thought of the devastating consequences it would have on the economy of Nova Scotia, means that fewer tourists are coming to the region to see and hear what our arts community has to offer. Decisions like that by the NDP government mean we must encourage and foster our homegrown talents even more, making this legislation doubly important. In fact, that decision shows how out of touch the NDP government is with most Nova Scotians. A healthy and vibrant arts community is important to our local economies. There isn't a riding in this province that doesn't have independent artists, whether they're painters, musicians, or others, and that's why supporting the arts is so important. And that is why my colleague, the member for Digby, introduced the sound recording tax credit in spring 2011. That bill provides a Nova Scotia sound recording tax credit available to eligible sound recording companies for certain qualifying expenditures on eligible sound recordings by emerging Canadian artists or groups. It's our hope that the NDP government will call this bill when introduced again by our caucus, and we will have support from the third party as well for this bill. Anything we can do to sustain and cultivate arts in Nova Scotia is vital because we've lost so many jobs under the NDP government's watch. The arts are also crucial to the history and culture of our Acadian and African Nova Scotian communities as well. The rich heritage from our African Nova Scotian community has produced some of the finest artists in this province and indeed this country. And were it not for artists from this important community, many Nova Scotians would not know about the historical importance and valuable significance it has had on our province. Acadian artists are of equal importance. Whether through song or books or painting or other genres, we learn about the rich Acadian history of Nova Scotia and how very important it is to our province. And that's why we should do everything we can to foster arts in these communities and protect the art, the history, and culture they have to offer Nova Scotia. We must protect and cultivate these artistic communities at all costs to ensure future Nova Scotians benefit from them. The Nova Scotia College of Art and Design is a critical component to art and artists in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. My leader, the member for Annapolis, has said he supports an independent NASCAD and considers it an asset to the province. And we know how important NASCAD is to Nova Scotia and to Nova Scotian artists of all fields. It's where many artists get their training. But even before people make it to NASCAD, we have children in schools who are learning about art, who are learning about music. And I think that this is one aspect of the whole picture that this government has forgotten about. They forgot how artists start. They start very often with a spark that's lit in a school. And I think about the experience that we had in Bedford Birch Cove when we learned that we were going to get a new high school. The group tried to put together a fundraising plan. In the end, after about a year, they were finally told by the Department of Education that we only do deals with municipalities. And when we went to the municipality, we were told by HRM that they had no mandate to build cultural spaces. And they said we didn't need a theatre, that it wasn't a requirement for a high school, and in the end, there's no theatre, there's a cafetorium. And I have to ask, where do they think artists start? Yes, HRM taxpayers are going to pay for enhancements. It didn't come from this government, it came from taxpayers ponying up extra through their municipal tax, as the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville well knows. Yeah.
Order, please.
Yes.
With the indulgence of the member, there's been a request for an introduction. I now recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to call the attention of the House to the Speaker's Gallery. And in the Speaker's Gallery is a friend and a close associate of one of the members of the House. It's Jerry Goldsworthy, and Jerry's here today observing the proceedings from a couple of different angles, I'm thinking. I saw you over there a while ago, Jerry. And Jerry is the husband of Madam Speaker. Welcome,
Thank you very
Jerry.
much. I certainly would welcome all of our guests today in the gallery, and I would remind the member not to speak to the guests. Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
So I would just like to leave the members of the government with this thought. that if you look at high schools, if you look at the future actors, the set painters, the costumers, the makeup artists, the directors, the singers, the musicians, the stage crew, many people who work professionally in the arts get their start in high school. So I urge you not to forget them when you're building high schools. And I also want to point out to the government, what happens to arts programs when you start cutting education? They're often the first to go. Sometimes you don't get art programs. Your music program gets cut. Your theater gets cut. And as we've seen, sometimes you don't get a theater, you get a cafetorium with enhancements that we're still fighting over because we can't get a budget out of to find out where the money's actually going. So with those few words, I would like to thank the minister responsible for culture and heritage for introducing this bill, and encourage him, if he would like to incorporate some changes like the sound tax recording credit or theaters in high schools, we'd be most appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Truro-Bible Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues in the House who've expressed their support for the arts and culture of Nova Scotia from all parties. When our government's Act to Respect the Status of the Artist was announced on Friday, March the 30th, I was in attendance, and a reporter for CBC, the esteemed Jean Laroche, posed the question, yes, but what difference does this make to artists' lives today? It's an interesting question, especially coming from someone working for the CBC, Canada's one and only public broadcaster, renowned for bringing the voice and culture of Canadians to Canadians. However, I've now had a chance to ponder his question, and I will endeavor to explain why, as a professional artist myself for 35 years, this legislation is so important to me and to artists around the province, how it lays the groundwork for future changes to our lives, and indeed sets a wonderful example for other provincial jurisdictions. But to put this bill in context, allow me to take you back a few years in time. See, the unwritten history of the arts is actually the history of mankind. For in its essentials, that set of human actions which the ancient Greeks first formalized as what we now call theater, belongs to no single race, age, or culture. It is rather an act of language, one by which the dangerous phenomenal world is safely imitated and celebrated. This act, lying as it does at the very heart of ritual, has been common to mankind, albeit in varying degrees, since man first evolved. The sorcerer imitating the stag in a scene painted on the wall of a cave, and the CBC actor imitating Sir Winston Churchill or Colin Thatcher, for instance, have common bonds in spite of the 20,000 odd years of actual time that divides them. The history, yes, I think I was in that show, the history of Colin Thatcher. The history of formalized arts in Europe actually begins in Athens, more than 5.5 centuries before the birth of Christ. There, in a tiny bowl-like hollow with their backs protected from the cold winds of Mount Parnes and the bright morning sun shining, Athenians celebrated the rites of the god Dionysus in music and dance. And that is what eventually evolved into theater, one of the greatest cultural accomplishments of the Greeks. Indeed, this new art form was so intimately associated with Greek civilization that every major town and colony possessed a theater. The Greek theater, or more precisely, the form that we have now come to know as tragedy, originated in the choric dithyramb, It was a kind of dance performed in honor of the god Dionysus. And since Dionysus was the deity of wine and fertility, it is not surprising that the dances dedicated to him tended to be rather disorderly and the dancers drunk. Aristotle tells us this. In fact, it's attested to by the very terms tragedy and comedy. The word tragedy, from the word tragos, means goat, and ode means song. So it literally harks back to the village dithyrambs in which the performers wore goat skins and capered about like goats. Comedy derives from the word komizan, to wander around villages, which suggests that these performers, these first performers, because of their body rowdiness and probably drunkenness, had been forbidden to perform in the actual city. Now, the genius who accomplished the transition from dithyramb to actual drama was named Thespis of Icaria. Thespis of Icaria. He was a playwright, an actor, a stage director, and producer all in one. Thespis is credited with a number of innovations. He's said to have connected the chorus with a plot. He seems to have evolved the protagonist, or Hippocrates, which means the answerer, who is destined to face a tragic dilemma and forced to answer the ever-questioning chorus. Sounds a little bit like our parliamentary system today. He also made the use of unpainted linen masks, and if we care to trust Horace, Thespis traveled about with a company of strolling players on a wagon. Hence, the traditional name for the professional actor is thespian. Bet you didn't know that. Now, a Greek ruler, Pisistratus, having seized power in Athens by a coup d'etat in the year 560 BC, decided to enlarge the artistic scope of the city of Athens by including plays for the first time in the official program of their festival. He asked Thespis to participate with his troupe. The date was 534 BC when this took place. And upon one such festive occasion, a gentleman came who was a renowned legislator of Athens. His name was Solon. He came to witness one of Thespis' performances and afterwards went to see the artist. Plutarch, another historian, has saved this oldest real-life backstage scene from oblivion. Plutarch said, and I quote, Thespis at this time beginning to act tragedies, and the thing, because it was new, taking very much with the multitude, Solon, being by nature fond of hearing and learning something new, and now in his old age living idly and enjoying himself with much music and wine, went to see Thespis himself, as the custom was, to act. After the play was done, Solon addressed Thespis and asked him if he was not ashamed to tell so many lies before such a number of people, 15,000 in fact. And Thespis replying that it was no harm to say or do so in play, after which Solon vehemently struck his staff against the ground. "Ah," said he, "if we honor and commend such play as this, we shall no doubt find it someday in our business in the legislature." So there you go. So when people ask me today, do you miss the theater? What do you think I tell them? I have a front row seat. Indeed, history shows us that arts. Yes, we need more thespians in the legislature. Indeed, history shows us that the arts and artists of Athens became respected to the point that they were made part of a coordinated institution whose primary function was to celebrate culture, teach morality, provide the citizenry with a sense of identity, and it came to rank alongside democracy itself in its importance, which I think is what this bill is trying to do today. So, in light of this historical context, it's my opinion that our government's act to respect the status of the artist is a very, very important step forward, and in fact does affect the lives of every Nova Scotian artist living here today. Over the years, many artists with whom I've worked in just about every discipline have carried, and rightly in my view, a small or large chip on their shoulder about how, despite the amazing work that they have done and the important role of art in society, how little formal respect and recognition Canadian artists in particular seem to get from governments, from the media, and even the general public, as compared to so many other professions that have formal professional associations, trade unions, various formal understandings with government that define their position and status. Artists here in Nova Scotia seemed to have next to nothing. Especially here, this was made much worse when the Nova Scotia Arts Council was liquidated by the previous Conservative government. Artists often get flack that they don't actually do anything useful. Get a real job, they're often told, or why do you just suck up government funding like a sponge, or just hang around at gala receptions dressed to the nines and drinking champagne, as some people seem to think in high places. So, status of the artist legislation gives artists the respect that I believe they are due. And it's my feeling that even if this legislation did nothing else, it would still be very important to the large number of artists right across Nova Scotia for this reason alone. In just over 2 years, I am very proud to be able to say this NDP government has not only re-established the Arm's Length Arts Council, we have also improved our film and television animation tax credits, thanks to the Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism. But we have also now formally established a place for artists within the fabric of Nova Scotia society and given them the respect they deserve. Thank you. And finally, just in one last point I'd like to make here is that this act also, I believe, provides a legislative peg for artists to hang future artistic hats. If in the future we want to build guarantees and programs for wage equity, codes of fair practice, tax incentives, levels of investment, arts education, greater public recognition into this legislation, then this actually affirms that this is an objective of government to improve the lives of artists. I was also very pleased to see that there's a mention in there of young people and getting their education in the arts and trying to get that happening here in Nova Scotia so they don't have to leave the province to go elsewhere to get it. So finally, I think that this legislation will actually help put into practical use by both the sector and the government if they work together in the future. And having status of the artist legislation available will now only be of this assistance. This is an incredibly positive and exciting step forward for our province. This is why I moved home to Nova Scotia in 2007. Not knowing I was going to go into government, but wanting to be of assistance to the young artists of Nova Scotia, to a new generation of artists, to give them hope that staying here in Nova Scotia and creating lives for themselves will actually be beneficial, and they have much to look forward to. I think that this also shows a government that puts its money where its mouth is and actually follows through on its promises. Yes. It's following through on its promises. Our Premier's promise to this sector, being a lifelong professional artist myself since the age of 16 years and having to leave this province in order to make a living, I am so proud to be able to come back as a legislator. Thank you. I'm proud to be back. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage and its minister, my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid, I would also like to personally thank, on behalf of Nova Scotian artists from right across, from coast to coast to coast, I would like to thank our Premier for approval and support for this important legislation, because I believe it shows that he, as I am, a champion of arts and culture in Nova Scotia, as is this NDP government. And guess what? We're just getting started. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I was very pleased to rise today on Bill 1, an act to respect the status of the artist. It was certainly a pleasure to listen to my colleague across the way from Truro Bible Hill. She certainly is an artist in her own right and a very well-spoken thespian as well. So we learned a little bit in that presentation. Madam Speaker, this bill actually is of particular interest to me because I have looked at policies and platforms in different provinces in Canada during elections, and it occasionally comes up. I know the Liberal Party in Alberta had proposed it in the last, not this current election, but the previous election. It may be in again. But this is something I think that progressive parties and progressive people think is important to recognize and support artists in our society. And I think Nova Scotia is really, almost preeminent in this fashion. We have wonderful colonies, areas, almost artist colonies of visual artists, painters, craftsmen, tremendous musicians of many different types of music that are represented. And I think for a province our size and with our small population, we have a lot of people that are making their living in the arts and a lot of communities that rely on that in the summer months. I'm thinking particularly with the different theatre festivals and attractions that bring tourists to various parts of the province. I'm thinking particularly of Parsborough, where I spend time in the summer, and they have the Ship's Company Theatre, which has shows in June, July, August, and maybe even into September. And it's a wonderful draw for people from the city to go to a smaller town and to experience original and live theatre. And so that I think is something that we do need to really celebrate. And I think that at least recognizing artists and their role is very important. And that's what's in this bill. I was just going through it and trying to sort of identify what the various segments or sections are. It's only a 3-page bill, and a lot of it goes to the definitions of who's who in the Act. But it does commit government to being aware of the artists in various roles that they play, and to actually engage them whenever the government is engaging artists, to make sure that they honor different pay scales and conditions that are set out by the various professions that are represented. So it sort of formalizes, I think, what we've probably been doing in that regard anyway, which is being respectful of their various unions and organizations. And at the same time, it does talk about recognizing their education and opportunities. And that is something that I wanted to look to a little bit in my comments today. I think that it's really good that the Creative Arts Council and the chair will be making regular annual reports to the legislature, because I think we need to try and track how well that sector is doing and how it's growing, and what government can do to actually support and encourage them and foster that growth. It's not enough to just sit back and say we have great artists in our province. We certainly have some that have received international acclaim, but we have many others who are really, really working hard to make their living in the arts, and they don't earn a lot of money. And Mr. Speaker, I wanted to speak a little bit to that, because the bill that my colleague from Digby referenced was a bill to actually recognize artists in a more I guess through income tax credits and really through the Finance Act, to recognize that they bring so much more to a community than we can really imagine. They help to define different communities. I think of the Acadian community and the vibrant singing and history and even modern music and dance. Different corners of our province have really unique. Gaelic. We have the Gaelic College in Cape Breton, and the music and again, very unique dance that is represented there. We have modern, and we have hip hop. We have all kinds of different music and areas. But what I'm saying is that most of the people who make their living in the arts are earning a very small income. And I have members of my family who have chosen that route, and I can say to you that it's very difficult to raise a family, to have responsibilities, to own a house, is really hard to do if you're making your living in a smaller community. Anywhere really in Nova Scotia is small in the arts scene. If you're in theatre, for example, we don't have a lot in here in Metro. We have some great theatres, but not a lot if you're trying to make your living year-round. So people have to often travel and go elsewhere. But in some jurisdictions, and I'm thinking particularly of Ireland, they actually put forth a bill that gave a tax credit to people who made their living in original art, and it was for any of their original work. So for performances, for an original work of art, if they sold that, it would be tax-free. And it was up to a certain amount. So if you happen to be enormously popular, like an Alex Colville or a Rita McNeil or Anne Murray, well, obviously you're not tax-free because you're making a big income because you're famous. But yeah, are there others? Oh, yes. I don't know about the member from Truro Bible Hill, but I think she made a good living in the arts, which is really a testament to her skill and talent. But I'm thinking of so many who just struggle to make a living, and I think it would be a sign to those people that this is the province to be living in, that you can, and so much of the work they do is digital and worldwide. You can live in Nova Scotia and build a career in the arts, and I think it would make us unique from the other provinces that have brought in legislation like Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec. And it would be a sign that we really want to attract people who are in the arts and do even more to bolster it. And so I don't think we would be the first to do that. As I said, Ireland did it for their artists, and certainly it did foster a lot of growth in that sector, and I think it bears looking at. Now that we have an act before us recognizing artists, there is a reason to look further and to see if there's something more concrete we can do, rather than giving a nod to the tremendous impact that artists have in our communities. So that was one thing. Also on the side of taxation, which could help artists, we have the tremendously successful film tax credit, which was mentioned as well by a number of members. And Mr. Speaker, that has been a tremendous success. It was introduced by the Liberal government in the 1990s. We were, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the first jurisdiction in Canada to do that, and it gave us quite an advantage initially. There was a flurry of activity in filmmaking, and quite a number of Nova Scotians have learned new skills, new crafts that are associated with that and made a good living as such. And we've had to keep increasing it in order to continue to be competitive with other provinces in the country. But also another bill that was proposed by the Liberal caucus, I believe it was just, perhaps just last year, was one to offer a tax credit as well to digital media, and I think to recordings in digital media. And that was something that the arts group had asked for. I believe it's been an official ask to the government as well. And it would be, again, something that would set the stage for a growth in that area. And we do have, again, some very successful companies that are doing digital media here. And I think that it would acknowledge that, and it would, again, allow Nova Scotia to start to put their mark on that industry and attract people who are working in that area. Because as we know, the cost to do any kind of production is large, and if you have a tax credit, it becomes a marketing tool, an advantage to this area. And I know that we could help the companies that are involved in that to grow if we put a tax credit in place. And if I can go back to the tax credit for their income, I think really because so many of the artists have a low income each year, it really wouldn't take much out of the bottom line of the province. I know the finance minister is very concerned about, trying to manage the fiscal affairs of the province, but I think if you did any kind of analysis, you would see that this would not in any significant or really measurable way impact the bottom line in Nova Scotia. But it would make a difference. It would allow us to go across the country and around the world and attract artists by saying that we really value them and that they can be recognized not only through nice words and legislation that recognizes them as a special group, but also with concrete services and concrete measures really that will reward them for choosing Nova Scotia as as a province to live in. So I really wanted to say that. Again, I think that a province like Nova Scotia gains so much from the artistic sector, and we have to measure it really in tourism and in other ways in terms of the vibrancy of our communities. And I mentioned Parsborough before you came in, Mr. Speaker, in terms of it being a wonderful community for their theatre. And I think perhaps you've been there. It's the Ship's Company Theatre there, but Antigonish has a theatre, I know, program in the summer. And there is still a small one in the valley in Wolfville. And again, if we'd had some other measures in place, maybe we would have been able to keep their more ambitious theatre that they had, the theatre program that they had in the summer in Wolfville. But I know it's been scaled back. But it becomes a tremendous marketing tool for the province if we have these kind of theatre and music festivals throughout the province. And I think that as the other performers come here or artists come here, they would learn that we're a place that particularly values artists and that we show that in, you know, where it really matters, in the pocketbook, that we recognize the struggle that they have to continue to make art and to follow their pursuit of creativity. And I'm not sure if any of the other members have mentioned it today, Mr. Speaker, but I'm sure all members of the House are aware of Richard Florida and the work that he's done under Creative Cities, and saying that what is going to define the growth centers and cities in the future are cities that are particularly creative. And he's come up with, I think it's an 8-point measure. He has 8 points that he measures to say how creative an area is. And actually Halifax, HRM, has a high score when you look at it in terms of that. He's been here to speak and said that we do very well. The one measure that outlines a creative city that we are not very strong on is the percentage of people born outside the country. And apparently having a larger number of immigrants in any city, it also contributes a great deal to the creative vitality of that area. And those are the kind of cities that young people choose to live in, ones that value the arts, that have a lot of artistic opportunity, performances and festivals and shows. That's what young people want, and the kind of industry that we want to attract, whether it be media or filmmaking or digital arts, they require young people to fill those roles. So we're very excited to see that we score well here, and that we could improve that even by taking some concrete government measures to take this legislation a step further and actually do something that would help artists in their financial pursuits. Because I can tell you, it is very hard. And as a parent, even if you have a child that's looking at a career in the arts, you do worry, because you worry that it's such a difficult path that they have chosen if they want to pursue an art that they love. And I do believe that people should follow their heart, and if that is where they're drawn to, then they should do that, whether it be acting or singing or dancing. But I know that it's very hard to really have a career that will sustain you, and there's not a lot of security. In fact, there's almost no security in that life. And so I think that anything we can do as a government to acknowledge that is important, and to recognize their professionalism, their training, and their recognition in their own fields, which this bill does. It talks about artists who may have received awards, artists who are recognized or hold copyright. It sort of goes through what criteria you would have to achieve in order to be seen as an artist. But it's a very difficult life, and I believe that the people who do it out of love of their craft and their calling, and that we as a government should do more, because I think we have a higher percentage of artists in our province than many other places in Canada, and that they are really very talented, and they contribute so much to the economic vitality of our cities and our towns. And that's just what Richard Florida's studies are all about. It's that where you have that creative core, you're going to attract more people to live. And when people come in for a festival or an event, the spin-off value is tremendous. And I know we've all sat here and read reports about the economic spin-off, whether it's for a rock concert or a Tall Ships event or an artist's day of painting. They all have a tremendous impact on the towns and villages and cities where they're located. And they draw people in in from across our province and from further afield. So I would really like to, in speaking on second reading to this Bill number 1, I would like to certainly support the bill. I'm glad it's come forward, but I'm just suggesting that there is so much more we could do that wouldn't be costly, but would send a signal to artists across Canada and elsewhere that they should come to Nova Scotia, because not only will they be, excited to see the variety of culture and arts that are here, but they will actually be given some small reward for coming to Nova Scotia, some small recognition financially that their work is valued here. And again, the fact that so much of the work is exported because it's digital now, they can choose to live wherever they like and do their work. In my community, there's one gentleman who is a very well-known Baroque violinist, and he plays with orchestras across all the United States. He plays, occasionally in Nova Scotia, and it certainly he's very generous about making his time available here, but he is sought after by orchestras across really all over the world. And yet he makes his home in Rockingham, and that's because he likes the quality of life in Nova Scotia, and he values the sense of community in Nova Scotia. But, we could attract more people like that who are traveling or recording music that can be sold anywhere in the world, or doing art that can be exported anywhere in the world, but they could choose to live in Nova Scotia. And I think that would be a tremendous boon to all of our communities. So I see one or two ministers paying attention, and, well, everybody I'm sure is, but taking note of what I'm saying is what I mean to say. And I hope that will be something that perhaps will be on the agenda to be discussed, if not today, at a future day. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to get up here and speak for a few minutes on this bill. I want to thank the minister in particular for bringing this bill forward. It has been a long time coming, and I know artists have been waiting for this bill, and I'm delighted to be part of a government that has in fact delivered on this commitment to artists. I want to support, and I support this bill wholeheartedly for 5 different reasons, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to put them on the table just in case I run out of time. One is that it's an important part of a commitment that was made by this party and this government in the 2009 election and before. We said we would do this, and we are doing it. It's part of a broad-based consultation with artists. We're doing it as part of a broad-based consultation. Mr. Speaker, I hear the members opposite talking about consultation. It was something they did not do when they eliminated the Arts Council, Mr. Speaker. And it is what we're doing. The status of the artist legislation is based on consultation. It was also something done on listening. Apparently the members opposite are not used to that either. But consultation and listening are part of that, and this government is consulting and was listening, Mr. Speaker, when it introduced this legislation. This legislation recognizes the value of the creative community. It recognizes the value of the creative economy to the Nova Scotia economy. And that's what we're doing, is we're underlining that with this legislation, Mr. Speaker. And unlike previous governments, this legislation and this government is making very specific commitments to the artistic community and making very specific commitments to developing the creative economy here in Nova Scotia. And finally, the legislation creates a platform for future initiatives in the creative arts field, whether it's film or digital arts or performance or any kind of creative endeavor that underlines this economy. So for these 5 reasons, I'm delighted to support this legislation, Mr. Speaker. So let me go back then, Mr. Speaker, to the nature of the commitment that was made. From 2006 to 2001, one of the first things that happened when I was elected, Mr. Speaker, my constituency association came and said, we need to do something about the Arts Council. We need to make sure that we have an Arts Council that's developed by artists, for artists, and in a way that benefits the arts. And that's what this legislation does. We made a commitment that this legislation would be developed, and we've done it. It was also part of our platform, Mr. Speaker, a platform that was developed in consultation with the arts community. And coming out of that consultation, this was the #1 priority, and we've done that. And that consultation took place over 2010, 2011, and I want to commend the Minister for undertaking that review and for following through on that commitment. And in terms of consultation, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage requested that the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council review these consultations and make recommendations. And I want to give a shout out, Mr. Speaker, to members of that committee, members of the Creative Nova Scotia Council who helped develop it. The Vice Chair, Jim Morrow, 3 members of the Nova Scotia Arts Community, Barbara Richmond, Peter Dykes, Anthony Black, and the Executive Director of Culture from Communities, Culture and Heritage. And Marcel McComb, Mr. Speaker, a gentleman who's been at the forefront of developing arts and cultural policy in Nova Scotia for many, many years, and I believe has now taken a leadership role in this process. There were consultations held right across the province over 6 months, and I should say I was a part of those consultations. They were an arm's length consultation. They were a group that was seen as legitimate by artists, by part of the community, and they went right across the province and spoke to as many people as possible. At one of the consultations, I think it was at the Citadel Hotel here, Mr. Speaker, the room was packed. People had to be out in the hallways listening, and that's, you know, the cultural community really embraced those consultations. And those consultations, the result of those consultations were reviewed by the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council and acted on. And I should say also, Mr. Speaker, that over the course of the past couple of years, I've had regular meetings with many members of my particular community in Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island, who've come down regularly. In fact, we have once almost weekly or monthly meetings at a place that I'm not going to mention right now. But Andrew Terrace, Chris Micah, Sheila Hunt, Robin Metcalf, Gay Hauser, Anthony Black, Erica Beatty, Wendy Lill, Mary Vingo, Natasha McClung, a number of them have, come to me or come through my office and said, we really need to do something for artists. And I'm delighted to be able to say that in the 5-point plan that we have set out, that we have now hit number 5 of 5. We have a plan, we've made commitments, and we are sticking to it, and we are delivering, Mr. Speaker. This status of the artist legislation also, Mr. Speaker, recognizes artists in a very specific way. It recognizes artists by defining artists, a difficult task in itself, but came up with a definition that the artists themselves have accepted. And it also reaffirms the value and the importance of arts and culture in Nova Scotia society. It gives artists what they've also been asking for, is just plain respect. They'd like the government and they'd like the community to respect what it is they do. And so this status of the artist legislation then symbolizes the government's recognition of the social and economic value and importance of Nova Scotia's arts and culture community. It also, Mr. Speaker, creates a platform for future activities, as I've said. We can now work with Arts Nova Scotia, work with the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council, and do far more. And the members opposite have talked about what it is the government can do to build on this legislation. And I know the minister was listening very carefully when they were speaking about initiatives. And I know the artistic community itself has said that they would like to be more involved in this process. And this legislation builds a foundation for those kinds of initiatives and those kinds of activities. And you can be sure, Mr. Speaker, that we will embark on those activities in partnership with the artistic community and the creative community, and we will do it alongside them. And we're not going to impose conditions on them that they themselves don't accept or won't impose on themselves. And so for these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to support this legislation, and I'd like to thank the Minister for bringing it forward. It's a commitment that we've made. It's a plan that we have, and we're sticking to it. It's based on broad-based consultation by artists, for artists, and in the interest of all of Nova Scotia. It recognizes the value of the arts and the creative community, and it creates a platform for future activities. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to this bill and for participating some more in this debate, and in particular to engaging the artists in our community and asking them to come forward and speak to this bill as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in question period today, the member from Cape Breton West requested information on the infection salmon anemia to be tabled by the end of the day. I want to thank my staff for the speedy work here. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table that document on ISA, a fact sheet, and thank you for the question. Could I have a copy of that, please?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage. If I'm to recognize the Minister, it'll be to close debate on Bill number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank all my colleagues for having their input on this piece of legislation. We're glad to see this legislation go through the process. So it's a pleasure to close debate on Bill number 1.
The motion is for closed debate on Bill number 1. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 1, entitled An Act to Respect the Status of the Artist.
Bill number 1, the Status of the Artist Act. Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government Host Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. Now I hand it over to the government or the official opposition House Leader for business for Opposition Day.
The Honourable Host Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Speaker. The hours tomorrow will be from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and following the daily routine and question period, we will go into debate on Bill number 3, the Sales Tax Act, and Resolution number 12, NDP Cost Pressures Address. And with that, Mr. Speaker, following that, the House will rise at 6 o'clock.
The motion for adjournment has been made. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We will now adjourn the sit between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., but we have reached the hour of late debate. And the topic as chosen earlier for the late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and very pleased to rise in my place today and speak about this very, very important topic. We know that there are many young people in our province who have mental health issues. Many of them, in fact, appearing very early in their lives. In fact, this year alone, since the school year started, I've heard from 3 elementary principals requesting information on what programs could be available to help their staff, help their students deal with some of the anxieties and stresses that students were exhibiting in the classrooms. So starting, very, very young, and we know now from the research that about 70% of many of the psychoses, the mental health issues that people have throughout their lifetime. We know that many can be treated, but however, from time to time, we know people with schizophrenia, with bipolar, and multiple personalities and so forth, that these will flare up and these will become problematic. But the research shows that if young people are diagnosed, they're assessed, and there's treatment early in life, the chances of very, very good lifetime outcomes, in fact, are well established and well known. And this is why when we are taking from a good program that exists at the IWK, it has become very, very much the topic on the minds of many Nova Scotians. I was amazed in my community, and also, of course, as the health critic for the Liberal Party, that I'm hearing from people across the province about this issue. And we all know that change must take place, and periodically, new models and new approaches, are brought forward, and in fact can be very, very beneficial. In this case, to young Nova Scotians that need mental health assessment and treatment. However, it's a case of we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater. If we have a program that's working, we keep that while building other capacities. Over the past week, I've had an opportunity to speak with mental health providers in 3 DHAs across the province. And unequivocally, the answer is we do not have enough resources right now. People can get assessed, but we cannot provide the timely treatment, the multiple times they may need to visit a psychologist, a psychiatrist. So this is what we're hearing. It's just a fact that is facing our province and many others with having highly qualified personnel. So I think this is a case of where we should have slowed down, take a look at the resources that we needed, keep in place what we have, and build on that. I think one of the, this is a case here where, yes, the clinical work done by psychologists, psychiatrists, and other clinicians, yes, is absolutely critical in the first phase of assessments and treatment. But I think we've perhaps underscored the role of the youth mental health worker. And I was surprised today that the minister, in fact, without a long elaboration, kind of summed it up as a custodial role. Well, I think if the minister would take time to speak to some of these people carrying out this role, that in fact she will come away with a very different profile of who these people are. And I think she also should talk to parents. I know she's had a background, but talk to parents who's had children literally move forward because of the consistency of the work done by the youth mental health worker. We know that the clinician is going to advance a program, but having those people working with our youth on a daily basis, making transitions to home and into community is a central part of the total delivery of the mental health team that the IWK has in place. And I just wanted to reference a couple of comments that are now been circulated. I know one was in the Chronicle Herald, and it says, "Please do not take the staff away from us. Don't take the support program from us. It helps more than anything ever has." And that's Ali Dawson, ACT client in the Chronicle Herald. During the day of the opening of the legislature and the protest across the street, I had the opportunity to talk to several parents and a couple of very, very bright young children, but young children who are who have been hurting as much of somebody with any kind of a disease, a condition, or were in an accident. People with mental health problems suffer deeply. And in the 3 young children that I spoke with, they talked about how the COMPASS program, yes, it's intensive and costly to have the number of people that provide the teamwork, but nevertheless, outstanding results. And for these 3 young people, it was the first time after several years from family doctor, school counselors, that they got in a program that truly helped them onto a better course and time in their life, and settling down in school and become, good students. The behavior issues are no longer present. The disruptions in their lives and in their families have been dealt with. So I think here, when we're talking about now 17 full-time youth mental health workers, and in the program there were just 55 full-time workers. The majority that are in the program are on a part-time, casual basis. So if we're going to take 17 out of the 55 full-time workers, this is an enormous hit to a program that has found these workers to be critical. We know that more outpatient services are needed to address long wait lists, but not at the expense of inpatient services. This was, the thing that, this was the area that really surprised me when I asked people at the IWK. They know there's a tremendous need still for inpatient programs. That has not disappeared, and it won't disappear, and we must find the right balance, but I think we've gone about it here in the wrong way. Without putting in place in our communities, from Sydney to Yarmouth and Bridgewater to Amherst, in our regional centres especially, having enough qualified people is where we should have looked at first. So these 17 people that are likely now to find themselves without work were so critical to the delivery of the program that I think a lot of training, a lot of experience, a lot of value to the IWK program or to our community or school programs. I think it's a shame we are losing these people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start, first of all, by saying that I started my working life as a youth care worker. I know very clearly what was involved in that work. I have the utmost of respect for people who do that work. When I did that work, I was 100%, more than 100% devoted to the kids in my care. And I know that the people who do this work, they feel passionately about what it is they're doing, and they do a very good job. This isn't about youth care workers and whether or not they do a good job. It's not about whether or not they care about the work they do, because I accept that. I know they do a good job. I know they care about the work they do. But Mr. Speaker, what this is about kids. It's about all of those families with children who get no services, who languish on wait lists for days, weeks, months, and in some cases years, where the only way they can get access is if their condition deteriorates to the point that they become urgent in what's required for them. Then they get into the system. This is profoundly a demonstration of a system that is broken, that requires change, and I recognize that change can be very difficult. This is probably the best example that I've seen of where it is you do the right thing to make the right changes, and you have to be prepared for one heck of a battle to do it. And Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that if that's what it requires to make this change, a bit of a battle, then I'm up for that. Because kids and their families deserve better than what they've gotten, and we are going to give them a better system. They are going to get earlier assessment, and earlier assessment means that they are going to have earlier access to treatment with better outcomes. The research is clear on this. There are other programs in this country that are doing precisely what we're doing. I trust the judgment and the expertise of the people who work in the field at the IWK, who have designed this shift in the model, and I will support them not only in terms of standing up and publicly explaining what they're doing and why, but we will support them with resources as we go forward. Mr. Speaker, I hear on a regular basis from families with kids that need services. The ACT program and the COMPASS program have provided excellent services to the families who were able to get into that program. But I can tell you that many, many families have not been able to get access. The model was not an accessible model. It provided services to a very small number of people that needed them, and we're changing that. We are going to see more families and more children around the province having access to service, earlier interventions, better outcomes. I think it's very important for the public to understand that the ACT and the COMPASS programs are not programs that deal with children that are psychotic. Kids with psychosis are seen on an urgent basis, and they're admitted to the fourth floor south at the IWK. In terms of what is available to families evenings and weekends, the opposition has said it's just an emergency room. This is not the case. We have mobile crisis units, Mr. Speaker, and indeed I've talked to the IWK to ensure that during the transition period, there is adequate supports, particularly until we understand what families who have used those services, whose children are just leaving, transitioning, that there are plenty of resources and supports in place for them. This is critical. I passed out in this House today a list of all of the various treatment programs that are available for kids through the IWK. And I did this because I genuinely want members in this House to understand the broad range of services that are available. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. But Mr. Speaker, we have a mental health strategy that's coming. We had a budget today that announced increased funding for mental health. There will be more resources invested. And as I've said, my commitment is to community-based care. It is as a priority. It is to children and youth. It is to early intervention. This very much will be areas where we will not only change the model and ensure that the resources we have are used to their fullest extent, but we will see new investment as well. Mr. Speaker, I don't like to see anyone in our healthcare system lose their employment, including any of the youth care workers. We still have 120 youth care workers employed at the IWK after this change in model. The Minister of Community Services recently announced a new program in her department, hiring 10 outreach workers around the province to work at children at risk. The Minister of Education has announced an expansion of the Schools Plus program, a program that will be offering more supports and services for young people and their family in the community. We are, as a team on this side of the House, pulling down the silos between the government departments, and we're talking about what are the things that are needed in the Department of Education, in our school system, in our teen health centers, in our schools, with our youth at risk, children in care. What are the things we need to do to build a stronger system that is there for the right purpose at the right time, meeting the correct needs? And the results are obvious. I've had members of my caucus come and talk to me about people who have come into their office in the last few weeks and talk about the response that they have received at the IWK in recent months based on the changes that are being made. Responses that are much different than what they have received 6 or 8 months ago. So, Mr. Speaker, we are making the changes that are necessary. These changes will result in better care sooner for children and their families. They will mean earlier assessment, earlier treatment, better outcomes. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to stress that the decision to adopt this new model at the IWK is one that has my full support. It's not one that I'm about to reverse, no matter how much yelling the members on the opposition benches want to do in this chamber, because, Mr. Speaker, we are doing the right thing. They are stuck in the past. They are stuck defending a status quo that they created, and we are very much moving forward in a way that will see the kind of change that people voted for when they supported our party and wanted to see a change in government in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to do just a quick introduction of somebody that's sitting in the West Gallery. He's been there for a little bit. I wanted to say hi to Nick Gear. He's from Lunenburg County, and he's just been here observing everything today, and I'm so happy to have him here, and I want him to receive the warm welcome of the House of Assembly. Also in the East Gallery, we have a number of people from the IWK, from the Compass program, from the ACT program, from Forest South, and all those programs that have found out that they no longer have a job, that are here checking out the proceedings here to listen to what the minister had to say, to, of course, chat to the opposition parties, to get their issues forward. And I want to thank them for being here tonight, and I want them to receive the warm welcome of the House as well. Now, we heard a lot.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope they enjoy this evening's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an interesting topic that we find ourselves in here. And I thought I'd try to find a way to maybe bring down what the minister tried to say here today. And I thank the minister for bringing this information forward, because I think we've been talking a long time about mental health services in this province. You know, our roles were reversed for a few years, and now they're back in this respect. And what I'm seeing is, I know that her intentions are there. She's got the information going forward. She's started some of the changes, but we're finding that maybe some of the explanation is not there. Maybe the implementation of that isn't going quite as easily as she would hope. Because I understand the issue of change. I understand the issue of, I'm trying to be nice to her, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to bring her things. She can't take something when I'm speaking well of her, constructive and some ideas. So again, I'll say I thank her for bringing this information forward. I thank her for doing the work and trying to bring to fruition the things that she talked about when she sat here in opposition. But we are 3 years in. We are 3 years that we're starting to see some change. And that change right now is coming with a fight that she says. She's willing to stand and fight. Why is this a fight to begin with, Mr. Speaker? Why isn't this a collaborative approach? Why is this a collaborative approach that came from, I mean, my goodness, looking at the throne speech, there was a whole bunch of strategies and was there 17 of them of ways to work with people, and then what we find is that they really didn't ask the people that are visiting us here today. They didn't ask the youth and child workers that are here today of how maybe to better accomplish their job, how to better serve Nova Scotian children and adolescents that are finding problems and issues with maybe programming that's not happening in their areas and having to move here to Halifax in order to get that. You know, one of the statements that she made during the ministerial statement that we had earlier today, and I thank her for the list of care services under the IWK mental health and addiction programs, and we do understand there's a lot of programs out there. They do lots of great things. They maybe aren't enough to address all the issues that we have in Nova Scotia. But one of the issues that really caught my attention, and I think caught the attention of the workers that are here today, is that she sort of called the youth care workers, you know, custodial in how they do their work. There was a custodial comment there that I'm sure that we could be able to grab from Hansard and be able to talk about it. And furthest from the truth, or furthest from the job description of these individuals, is the issue of custodial care. You know, I think the individuals that come before ACT and Compass and all these programs, and whether you're even working in Force South, require the consistency of one of these workers to be able to help them through their days, to help them through the issues that of course that are beseeching them at this time, to find a better way to get them through. These people are so important to the care of these individuals that it's you know, it sort of begs to the issue of why did this happen? Why do 17 of these individuals lose their job? Why have they been moved on to the unemployment line? Why did this happen without any real consultation with these individuals? That is what we heard from the workers as we met with them outside this house today. This is the information that they brought for us, and I thank them for the information that they brought to us today in, of course, a nice document to all Nova Scotia MLAs, and I'll table this once I finish reading it. Reverse the IWK cuts. The IWK has given notice of their intention to cut 17 full-time or equivalent youth care worker positions. This will negatively affect the ACT and Compass inpatient programs offered to youth. We ask the IWK to reverse that decision. And of course, when we